UnleashIndependence.com.
All right, thank you for tuning in today. We have a very special broadcast. We have with us the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island, Mr. G. Edward Griffin. The topic of discussion is collectivism, and then, of course, anything that may lead to the Fed. I don't know how we have a conversation with you and not talk or ask you about the Fed.
Right.
But if you wouldn't mind just giving us a little background of yourself and maybe let some people that maybe aren't familiar with your work.
Well, sure, I'd be glad to do that. It's kind of a boring topic, but I guess it's essential. I've been doing independent research and writing for most of my adult life. I published my first book in 1964. It was called The Fearful Master, a second look at the United Nations. And I've written on topics that were generally controversial, the New World Order, history of taxation, banking and currency, money issues, all of that sort of thing. I've gotten heavily into alternative health issues as well. One of my better known books is called World Without Cancer, the story of vitamin B17, which is about an alternative control for cancer that comes from nature. And that's what I do. I've usually managed to stay on the controversial side of issues because my view, frankly, is that if I'm just talking about things that everybody knows or agrees with, I'm probably just wasting my time. So I look for areas that I think are important, and yet I feel that there needs to be a lot of education on. So basically, I'm a writer and a researcher. I write books, and I've produced some documentary films.
Very good, very good. Well, I'm a big fan of your work, and I know Brock is too. Brock, you want to come on?
Yeah. I have to say thank you. I mean, your book, Creature from Jekyll Island, I'm young in my 20s, but your work is kind of what opened my parents' minds on the left-right paradigm, just discussing kind of following the money, and just the way you wrote your book was so factual. It wasn't an opinion book like most people do, and so just thank you.
Well, thanks for that. Yeah, I try hard to make sure that when I'm expressing my opinions, it's well identified as such, but I usually hold off on those until after I've demonstrated a lot of history upon which those opinions are based. So I've tried very hard to do that. Thank you.
So, Mr. Griffin, could you give us a little bit of an understanding or just maybe a definition of collectivism or what collectivism is?
Yes, I think that it's important, especially in this current age, for us to be clear on the definitions of what we believe. People have belief structures. They live by them. They direct their lives. Sometimes very important decisions are made on the basis of ideology. And yet, it's hard for most people to define what they believe and to put a name on it. Most of the words that we use today, I think, are not very clear. They mean different things to different people. You find groups identifying themselves as conservatives. On the other side, you've got the so-called liberals. You've got left-wingers and right-wingers, Republicans and Democrats, and communists and fascists and socialists, and all of these names are floating around. We have neo-fascists now, neo-conservatives, all of these, and progressives, and all of these words are thrown around, and most people have no idea what they mean, except in sort of vague general terms. So quite some time ago, I became intrigued by that phenomenon, and I decided, we've got to do something about this, because I discovered that when people who were debating issues on the basis of those labels, quite often it was the label that was getting in the way. When they got to talking about the nitty-gritties of what they actually believed, they were in agreement. And so once you get rid of those words, it seemed to make it easier to discuss the issue. So having said that, I have been reading for many, many years ideological dissertations and tomes, the classics all the way down to the modern stuff that you see on the Internet. And I discovered a long time ago that, at least in the Western world, there are really only two ideological viewpoints, and only two. All the rest of these words are merely variants mostly variants of one of them. And those two viewpoints are collectivism on the one side and individualism on the other side. So it's important to know what collectivism is, because if you look at words like communism, socialism, fascism, Nazism, all of these things, they're actually variants of collectivism. They're all very, very similar to each other. In fact, they're identical to each other when it comes to the basic philosophies. So having gone through all of that, individualism is the opposite of collectivism, and so I became rather focused on this issue some time ago, and we've written a lot about it, and you'll find the in-depth analysis of it and the historical evolution of these concepts posted to our website, which is called Freedom Force. It's freedomforceinternational.org. So you find all of this there. But basically, collectivism is a point of view, a philosophy, an ideology probably is the best word for it, that has certain characteristics, certain cherished beliefs included in it. One of them is the idea that the group is more important than the individual. Individualists believe that the individual is more important than the group. On all of these issues, individualists are the opposite of collectivists. But the collectivists believe that the group is more important and that individuals must be sacrificed, if necessary, for the greater good of the greater number. Now, I was taught that in school. That was when I went to the University of Michigan. That was an idea that was taught, and it was not taught to be questioned. It was just taught as an obvious ideal, and we all accepted it. I did. I thought it was a great idea, the greater good of the greater number. How could you argue with that? Democracy, isn't that the basis of democracy? Majority rule and all of those sorts of things. Individualists don't believe that, and you may wonder, a lot of people, how could you challenge that concept? Well, you can challenge it because it's based on a false assumption. The assumption is that the group exists. In reality, there is no such thing as a group. Group is not a thing, it's a word. It's an abstraction in the mind. It's a mathematical concept. You can't touch a group. You can't see a group. A group doesn't exist. You can touch a person. You can see a person, but group is this abstraction for the concept of more than one person. It's all based on the concept of person. It's a mathematical abstraction. And it's the same thing with the word like forest. There's no such thing as a forest. There are only trees. You can't see a forest. You can't touch a forest, but you can touch trees and you can see trees. And so it follows through in a lot of things in life. And so when we say that the group is more important than the individual, and the group doesn't even exist, we've made a terrible mistake, because now we're saying that something that doesn't exist, has rights and it's more important than individuals which do exist, and all of a sudden you're on that slippery slope where you come to the point where some individuals say that they speak on behalf of the group. Now it's like that Orwellian concept, all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. Well, when individuals start speaking on behalf of the group, now those individuals who are real become more important than other individuals, more equal. And all of the totalitarian systems of the modern age are based on this erroneous assumption that there is such a thing as a group and that the individuals must be sacrificed for it. And so you always have leaders now who say, I represent the group. I am the leader of the group, and we shall decide what is best for society, what is best for the majority, And so anyway, that's one of the important concepts or the distinctions between collectivism and individualism. We could go on with others, but this isn't the place for it. I would urge anybody interested in this very important and I think fascinating topic is to come to freedomforceinternational.org and look up this thing. It'll be found on the issues section, and I think it's going to be quite an eye-opener for those who are inclined to ideological thoughts of this kind.
Yeah, no, very good, and we'll go ahead and post that link underneath our videos and where we have this available for our listeners so that they can find you. And this information, it's really eye-opening what you bring up, because I think a lot of the times people do, they play hypotheticals where, well, wouldn't it be better to act this way against one individual to save the all of them or all the people and things like that. I really appreciate your insight to that. So thank you very much.
Yes, it's a common thought, and we cover all of those assumptions and those fallacious chunks of reasoning there. Where do these rights come from to take a life of another person? And is it a mathematical source? Do two people have the right to take the life of a third person because there are two of them against one? Or does it come from something more fundamental than that, which is that any one of them could take the life of another person under some circumstances? And, of course, that's the answer. What are those circumstances? Those circumstances would be in a defensive mode. You have a right to take the life of another person if it's necessary to defend your own life, to protect your own life liberty, and your property. Negative. The proper use of coercion or force is only justified when it's negative and when it's defensive, but never aggressive, So this is how we start off, and you have to get down to some basics, and once you get to them, they're not that difficult. And boy, it's an eye-opener for most. It certainly was for me when I realized that probably about 99% of all of the laws that we have around the world are based on this collectivist assumption that the individual must be sacrificed for the greater good of the greater number. It's no wonder the world is as sick as it is.
I would say that's just amazing. And when I first heard that from you, actually, it just changed my viewpoint of everything. I mean, I thought I understood liberty, but you put it in such simple terms, so that's amazing. One question I had for you, though, was it seems like in some of the old books from like the early 1900s or even in the 1930s and 40s, people were using the term collectivism and individualism, but nowadays it seems to be no one that uses it. I guess what caused that to change?
Well, one could be a little jaundiced in the answer to that. I don't know really why, but I suspect it's because if you use words like that, you have to understand what they mean. They don't come with all of this garbage attached to them like other words do, like socialism, communism, Nazism. You can't just respond to them emotionally. You have to say, well, what is collectivism? What is individualism? In the political arena today, our leaders, I'm afraid, I hate to say this, but I know it's true, they really don't want us thinking too much. They really don't. They want us to respond emotionally. They want us to say, yeah, this is right and this is wrong, but we don't know why. But we like this person. He's sincere. He'll do the right thing. It's the idea that the man on the white horse, let's follow him. We're not sure where he's going, but he's got a white horse. So it's that kind of a mentality they really like, because if people don't ask questions and they don't have principles, they're a lot easier to lead. When you've got your principles clearly in mind, you start asking questions, then politicians have a rougher time because most of them are merely con artists.
No, yeah, absolutely, and I kind of want to transition a little bit because we don't have you for that much more time, but I do want to ask if you are familiar with this new sentiment kind of coming out that's it's called Ignore the Fed, and with your work with the Creature from Jekyll Island and everything else that you have done, I wanted to get your opinion. There's a video floating around YouTube. This gentleman, I think his name's Brad Gray. Is that correct, Brock?
I think it's Rob Gray, actually. But
Rob Gray from OpenCurrency.com, and he is he's talking to Congress or in some sort of forum, and basically he asked that people, or that Congress do not pass any sort of sound money legislation. He says that it's a wolf in sheep's clothing, and the best thing to do is to ignore the Fed, because it's not a viable option. It will collapse. It will not be able to be sustained, and the market will not wait for them, and we'll move on and we'll find better options, and that's what they're already doing. I wanted to just get your opinion on that, or if you have a comment towards that.
Well, I probably should be very cautious about commenting on that until I know more about it. But based on what you have said, it sounds to me like it's kind of a shallow argument. In other words, it has some truth to it, but it has some elements that don't sound right to me. It is true that the Fed is not viable. There's no question about that. It's got to collapse. But it's not true that you can ignore it because it has the power of law behind it. And even though the money system collapses down to zero, we have such things as legal tender laws, which require the American people to accept this worthless stuff. And when everything collapses and you want to use your alternative currency, they'll simply say, no, you can't do that. That's counterfeit. You must use this Federal Reserve note by law, you see. So you can't ignore it. It's the bull in the china shop. You can't ignore it. You've got to deal with it, I think. Although I would praise anybody that's talking about an alternative currency, because I think we do have to restore this country to a sound currency based on gold or silver. But I'm not too happy about the concept of ignoring the Fed because they have the power of law behind them.
Sure, absolutely. You bring up a good point on that. I have a question. This is actually, it was submitted to us from, well, we have a couple that I wanted to get to, but this one is from Julie, and Julie wanted to know if you think that there's a certain type of upbringing that can encourage independent thinking for a child, and if you could elaborate on that.
Well, I have to think a little bit about that because I'm sure that upbringing has a lot to do with how a child develops. There's no question about that. But on the other hand, I think most people, in spite of their upbringing, have a certain capacity for intellectual thought. Now, maybe they don't develop it, maybe they're not encouraged to develop it, and certainly the school systems today, it doesn't encourage people to develop this independence of thought. We go through school and our grades are dependent pretty much on the degree to which we just accept what's being taught to us. I know even when I was going through school, which is way before this became really intense, even then there was a certain pressure that, well, don't ask too many questions, don't make waves, just remember what the teacher told you, what the textbook said, and regurgitate it back, and if you do that without questioning, you get a good grade. But anyway, I really think that it's true that the way you're brought up, it makes a lot of difference. But still, I have hope that for most people, when they suddenly realize that they're living in kind of a fantasy world, and that much, if not most, of what they've been told about authority is wrong, and that the authority that's out there is not really interested in their best interest, but in the best interest of the authority structure. Once they get that clearly in mind, I like to think, at least, that most people will break that eggshell that's been put around their brain by their upbringing and say, wait a minute, it's time for me to start thinking independently. So I guess to answer your question, I would say yes and no on that. Let's hope that most people have the ability to break that mold.
No, great.
I've got a question also. This is from Zach. He wanted to know, does the Fed have a 100-year charter? There's been rumors floating around that they had a charter originally, and so it's about to expire, but that's the only thing I've heard is it a rumor. Can you shed some light on that?
Well, it's another one of those yes and no things. I hate those, but they're all over the place. Originally, the Fed did have an expiration date. But a long time ago they changed that. You see, the Fed has been amended, the charter has been amended over 100 times since it was passed originally in 1913, and one of the things they got rid of was that expiration date. So now the expiration of the Federal Reserve is, the word they use is indefinite. So in other words, it's renewed automatically indefinitely, which means it will never be automatically rescinded. But that doesn't mean Congress still can't abolish it. They can, but it won't happen because of a pre-programmed date.
Gotcha.
All right. And final question I have, this is from Christine, and Christine asks, in all the histories or scriptures that I have read, the majority has always failed and entire civilizations have been destroyed. According to Scripture, God has only made promises to the remnant, the few, or the little flock, whatever it may be called. Why do you believe that the masses never learn? Is it because we believe it will never happen to us?
Well, it brings up a really important subject, and that is the role of the majority or the role of the masses. The unfortunate truth is, the surprising truth is, that throughout history, the majority of the people have never made much of a difference. They've always been followers. The real movers and shakers of society that make things happen have always been a small number. Every society that's ever risen, every civilization that's ever been built that's worth anything, has been built by a relatively small number of people in the lead. And it's certainly true of the American Republic. It's true of Western civilization. It's true of all civilizations. So the idea that we have to get 51% or a higher number of the people to understand and to take the lead in something is based on a false model. The remnant, the elite, the small numbers are always the ones that you have to be concerned with. And in a way that's encouraging, because a lot of us will say, golly, the guy next door, he just doesn't get it. I talk to people and they don't seem to care, and it's as though it makes any difference that the majority cares, because it doesn't. The fortunate thing is that all we need to do is reach that 3%, or approximately, maybe not even that, of people who do care, who do understand, who do have the gumption to get up off their couches and to assume leadership positions in society, to take an active role in the organizations out there, the political parties, the church organizations, the labor unions, to become active in media outlets, to undertake a radio talk show, whatever it takes. Some people will always be in the forefront in a leadership capacity. So yes, it's true that the majority is going to be very laconic and they're going to follow. But instead of being upset by that, I think we should recognize it as an opportunity and a very good sign that the 3% to which we like to think we belong, we can actually make a huge difference in the future of the world.
Awesome. Great. Well, one last question. This is by David Miller, and comment. He said, his efforts in pursuit of truth have raised awareness across the board. He said, my question for him would be, what should states and counties and cities and families do to protect themselves from this fiscal disaster?
Well, there are certain definite things that can be done, and I think most people are probably tired of hearing about them, that could be done to protect yourself and your family from fiscal disaster. But that's not the whole picture, because the fiscal disaster, as important as it is outranked by another disaster, which is a lack of freedom, the destruction of society. And the unfortunate fact is that when the fiscal system collapses, if it does, if the economy collapses, the monetary system collapses, what usually happens, and I'm afraid will happen again, is that people will find themselves in bondage to the state, because they'll turn to the state to save them when they're hungry, when they're sick. They want the government to provide them with food and shelter and education and health care, and pay the mortgage, to pay for their insurance, to tell them what to do and where to go and how to live. Once it reaches that stage, then the economy or fiscal security doesn't seem much important anymore. But so with that eye on that long view, that we must restore the system and think about that, the answer to the first part is easy. To protect yourself from fiscal chaos is pretty easy. All you have to do is get whatever savings you have out of money, because money, at least as we know it today, like Federal Reserve notes, national currencies are all fiat currencies. They're not backed by anything. They have no intrinsic value. They only have political value. The only value they have is because you're forced by law to accept them, and that does give them some value. But as they keep making so many of those dollars and dollars, each one gets less and less valuable, and you can buy less and less with it. So the answer to the question, though, is to the extent that it's possible, get whatever savings and whatever wealth you have out of national currencies and put it somewhere into something that has intrinsic value. For the average person, the easiest answer to that question is gold or silver, bearing in mind that if the system collapses, the governments can still say, well, it's illegal for you to own gold and silver. They'll come and take it away from you. So I say that the fiscal question is not necessarily the only question here. But other things, if you have a business, it would be possible to put whatever assets you have into excess inventories. If you were had a tire business, for example, maybe you'd instead of having a 1-year supply of tires, you'd go to 2 or 3 or 4 years of tires. Anything that's not money, anything that has intrinsic value would be the best way, in my opinion at least, to avoid the fiscal chaos that's coming in the event of the total collapse of the national currency.
Wonderful. Well, so thank you, Mr. Griffin, G. Edward Griffin. Again, you can find his work. His website is freedomforceinternational.org, and we'll have that link down below. Please share this, get out this information that he's provided, and work very hard to produce. And again, thank you so much for coming on, and great information. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, gentlemen, thanks for inviting me.
Independence is the foundation. This doesn't mean you are alone. With our online community, you are able to exchange information with people who share your same desire and respect for self-reliance. Thank you for being a part of Unleashing Independence, the place where complaints are curbed and solutions are obtained. You can control your life rather than have life control you. UnleashIndependence.com. UnleashIndependence.com.